Do you remember when you were young? Who in here is still young? Come on, every hand really should go up, right? I mean, we're still young at heart. I'm just like all the other teenagers. The difference is I'm 51, almost 2 years old, right? So there's still a bit of youthfulness in this group. But when you were young, actually in numbers, and some of you who are still young, you understand this, that the world is your oyster. You ever heard that phrase? I'm not even sure what that means, but we've heard that phrase, that the world is my oyster, because what that meant is this idea that everything is out there for you to get, just waiting for you to have everything you desire. There will be experiences, there will be relationships, there will be fame and fortune waiting for you around every corner. Opportunities are as numerous as the stars in the sky, the sand on the seashore, and they're waiting for you to go and get them. So you make plans and you set goals and you get this trajectory of this is where I'm going and this is what I'm going to do, and you pursue your dreams and you work hard and you establish yourself and you fight to gain respect. You fight to gain position and prominence. You build a network of friends. You build colleagues around yourself. You build your reputation. And in that age of idealism, you know that you will find happiness when you've become established, and you'll gain respect, and your social network will look upon you and go, "You are so blessed." And then life happens. You hustle hard, you go to work early, you stay up late, you achieve much in your profession. You get more than you ever imagined, and yet somehow you still wonder if that's all there is. Kerry Newhoff tells of a time in his life he began his career as an attorney. And as an idealistic budding lawyer, he was struck by the reality that everywhere he looked around him in the firm in which he was working, there was not a single happy attorney. In fact, he offered to pay $1 million, maybe a little beyond his means at the time, but he offered to pay $1 million to whoever could find a happy attorney. He never had to pay up. But these are the men you look at and women that you just assume that they've got everything. They've got the nice cars, they've got the nice house, they've got the beautiful wife, they've established themselves, they have the reputation, but after all is said and done, they're just downright miserable. And he tells the time of on a Friday when a lawyer in his 30s comes into the law firm and he's waving his lottery ticket that he just bought down at the gas station. He says, "If I win this weekend, I will not see you on Monday." It happened to be the president of the firm. You know, this guy had it all, but he was willing to find something else because it just did not lead to the satisfaction that he had hoped. When we're young, we tend to think we've got the whole lifetime ahead of us to accomplish all of our dreams. In one survey, 96% of 18 to 24-year-olds, 96% agreed with this statement. "I am very sure that someday I will get to where I want to be in life." That is the message that we continue to share with people. If you believe it, you can achieve it. And we continue to hold out that hope. And I think most of us even here would want to tell our children, we certainly don't want to be the dream crushers that say, "You need more realistic goals, children." Dream big. Absolutely. We want them to have bigger dreams than even we hoped or imagined. But as life goes on, what we don't want to happen is this sense of disillusionment because we start with this idealism. It's ingrained within each of us that we have this idealistic perspective. In fact, adolescent development people, they tell you things like this, is that as teenagers grow, their minds are in this place where they begin to think about thinking. And as they think about thinking, they think about how things should be. And as they think about how things should be, they create these ideals. And so parents, many of the arguments that happen in the family is because you're not the parent that they think you should be. because they've started thinking. And so they create these ideals, and it's not always, and the same thing happens in the workplace. And you see the same thing in our politics. The world isn't as it should be, so in our naive optimism and idealism of adolescence, early, middle, late, they're frustrated because, well, they don't have the jobs that they'd hoped for, they don't have the parents they'd hoped for, all these things that come in, they just are frustrated. You know, as you get older and you enter your 20s, there are those whose hearts have been broken more times than you can imagine. As a result, they decide to never trust a man again. The optimistic investment banker thinks everyone's in it for themselves because everywhere he looks, that's what he sees. So he determines, well, that's the way it is. I'll be in it for myself. And what many people discover is that the optimism of your teens and 20s, Carrie Newhoff writes, the optimism of your teens and 20s gives way to the realism of your 30s. And by the time you hit 30, many of your once in love friends have split up. Many of your once enthusiastic coworkers hate their jobs, and many once solid friendships have dissolved. Not the most optimistic of outlooks. You know, as we grow older, you realize that your days are numbered. You begin to see, as they say, the sands of the hourglass passing away. So are the days of our lives. That's a flashback, right? So what do you do when life sneaks up on you? What do you do when life sneaks up on you and slaps you across the face? That's a situation that Moses addresses in Psalm chapter 90. If you have your Bibles, I hope you do. We're going to turn to Psalm 90. We've been working through our study in the book of Psalms. If you don't have a Bible, there should be a Bible in the pew in front of you and under the chair in which you sit. That's page 588 in the Pew Bible. Psalm 90. If you haven't already, let me encourage you again to grab the reading list. It's out at the welcome desk to join us in reading as we continue to read through the summer towards the end of the book of Psalms. Psalm 90, you'll see at the top, says, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. This is the oldest psalm in the book of Psalms. It was written by Moses. It takes us back to nearly 500 years before the time of David. And so when you think of the book of Psalms, it's this collection of psalms or songs that were written over a number of centuries. And despite the age of this book, the truths here are relevant even to today. It speaks of the deep emotional difficulties that happen when we come face to face with our mortality. But before it comes to our mortality, it begins with God's eternality. You see, God is eternal. And that's what we read in verses 1 and 2. It says, beginning at verse 1, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. And that's our temptation to look at this and say, isn't that sweet, to know that God is our dwelling place, how peaceful, how serene that must be to know that God cares about us. And under his arms we find shelter. And that's kind of the picture we get when we look at this, is that's what the message is that we're talking about God's protection and provision. But really the focus here is the throughout all generations. Yes, God is those things. He is our shelter. He is our dwelling place. He had been that to Israel when Moses had been with them. He had provided for them again and again. But the point is not just this generation, but throughout all generations, from now on back. And in verse 2 it goes on, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. God was there when the mountains were born. Doesn't that raise some questions in your mind, like, how was a mountain birthed? I mean, talk about painful child labor. This is no small baby. But God was there when it happened. God was there when the mountains were born, when the earth was created. He brought it into being. God has existed from everlasting to everlasting. God is eternal. For God, time is not an issue. He exists outside of time. He was there when time began. He existed previous to time. But you and I, our reality is quite different. And while verses 1 and 2 speak of the eternality of God, verses 3 through 6 speak of the brevity of humanity, man's mortality. Moses writes at verse 3, he says, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but the evening it is dry and withered. The idea is this, that even if you live to be 1,000 years old, Methuselah, what he lived to be 900 and some years old. Even if you live to be 900 and some years old, it's not even like a full day to God. That's how he begins. It says, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day. But then he even narrows it. It's not even like a day, he says. It's more like a watch in the night. A watch in the night was between 3 and 4 hours. For God, it's like that. That's how our life is, even if it were to be 1,000 years old. In the morning, it's like fresh grass. But by evening, that grass has withered and died. So it's this picture of the brevity of life. It says in verse 5, you sweep people away in the sleep of death. It's like a flash flood that comes in and sweeps away all the fertile soil. Life is quickly over. And then look at verse 7. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. See, because our inclination is to blame God for the shortness of our lives. I mean, even the psalmist Moses here gives some blame to God. It says, God, it is you who is the reason that our lives are short. But ultimately, the reason does not lie with God, but lies with God's holy indignation. It comes to righteous judgment. Going on at verse 9, all our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or even 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. The reason our lives are short, the reason that humanity faces mortality is because of sin. You see, there's no sin that is hidden from God. There is no sin outside of God's sight. And because of that, we face the consequences. The Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death. What we earn, what we deserve is death. In the garden, what did God say? When you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in that day you will surely die. And when sin entered the world, so did death. Though we may live to be 70 or 80, the end is the same. And even if you live 70 to 80, your lives are filled with trouble and sorrow. Remember what happened because of the fall. Because of the fall, toil entered our experience. Man would struggle in toiling in his labors. The wife would toil with this idea of being in subjection to her husband. There became this power struggle. There became this work struggle. Struggle became part of the norm when sin entered the world. And death as well. And so we begin to number our days. There's this thing that happens, I guess they call it midlife. And at midlife is the point where you begin to say, look how long I've lived. And transition to saying, how many years do I have left? And we begin to count our days. And so when you begin to count your days, there are really three responses that we typically take when we begin to count our days. And it's not just as we get older that we begin to count our days. Some youth, faced with this idea that life is short, have other responses too. So our first response, when we begin to count the days, the responses to mortality, the first one is cynicism. You conclude this: life sucks, and then you die. I know, some of you may be offended by that word. I'll use siphons. Life siphons, and then you die. Is that better? But that is the common philosophy of so many in our world today. Life is miserable. That's the word that Moses used. We toil, it's troublesome, and then we die. So what are some of the contributing factors towards cynicism? First of all, one of those contributing factors is knowledge, because the longer you live, the more knowledge you have, and the more knowledge you have, you see people who, well, they cheat the system and they get ahead, so you become cynical because you think everybody's cheating the system. As you look around, you see the fallibility and the frailty of human life. The idealism that you had as a youth is replaced with what you might call realism. It's just the way things are, but in truth, it's cynicism. Because the truth is, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to remain that way. You don't have to be cynical about life. So you know too much. And usually knowledge is good, let's be honest. It's a good thing to gain knowledge. But the more you experience life, the more you look around, the more you see that things don't measure up to your idealism that you had as a child. And then you begin to project. You project your past onto the future. Well, it's always been this way. It will continue to be that way. I'm not going to treat my bosses with respect because they didn't treat me with respect. And so now you go to your next boss after you've lost your job and you say, he doesn't deserve it because that boss didn't deserve it. You project your past onto your future. Maybe you got burnt before, so you assume that everybody's going to burn you. Someone you betrayed you, so you determined not to trust anyone ever again. Someone broke your heart, so you determined never to love again. You project your past onto your future, believing that this is all there is, and there is no hope for anything better. The third step then is just to stop trusting and hoping and believing, to stop having faith. You conclude that you don't need friends. You conclude that you'd be better on your own. You conclude that this isn't getting any better. So instead of seeing people for who they are, you just expect them to be what they've been, and you hope no more. And sometimes we project that onto God. Sometimes what we do is when God doesn't answer the prayers we expect Him to answer, our cynicism gets pointed in His direction. And we assume that God is a God who doesn't hear, and God will never hear because He didn't answer the prayer the way that you thought that it should be answered. But you understand you're putting yourself in God's space, in God's spot, in God's place when you do that. In your idealism, you had an expectation that from your perception, God missed. Why wasn't my father healed? Why wasn't my relationship restored? And so you assume that God is a God who is far off and not a God who is near, and so you don't pray anymore. Many don't attend church anymore, and you become cynical. There's another response when we begin to count our days. It's the response of hedonism. Hedonism, of course, is the pursuit of pleasure, and your whole life is engulfed with this desire just to find pleasure. It's what a number of years ago they called YOLO, right? You only live once. The assumption, well, initially that was meant to be a good thing. You only live once, make the most of it. But it really became you only live once, so eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we die. The YOLO attitude gave reasons to take risk. The YOLO attitude gave reasons just to live a promiscuous lifestyle, to seek pleasure, to seek personal pleasure. But it's not all in the immoral side of things. That's also what drives the pursuit to find a high-paying career. It's what leads to the pursuit of finding prominence in a position, is you want the pleasure that comes with it. And so you assume that all there is in this life is the pursuit of happiness. So much in our life is determined by personal happiness. If you really love me, you'd want me to be happy. Have you heard someone say that? But there's so much more to life than just happiness. But when we count our days and we assume this is all there is, we believe that what we deserve is at least this 70, 80 years of happiness. But in the end, whether we're talking about sexual promiscuity or the pursuit of happiness in general, or even if we're talking about cynicism, the focus, notice, is on self. It's this ever-increasing expansion of the desire to please yourself. Cynicism is about self. Hedonism is about self. In verse 10 it says, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are trouble and sorrow. Because it never quite measures up to what you imagined it to be. And if this world is all there is, then flying away, from the hymn, I'll fly away, O Lordy. If that's all there is, then it's a death sentence, if this is all there is. It's not an opportunity for hope, but an opportunity for despair. And look at verse 12. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So what Moses is saying is, do count your days because your days are short. But rather than cynicism, rather than hedonism, it's an issue of faith. Ism. I felt like I needed an ism in there, and I couldn't come up with one. But perhaps we can steal from Piper and call it Christian hedonism. This pursuit of finding our pleasure in the pursuit of God. But what we're looking for is faith. So that's another alternative. You can be cynical, you can be hedonistic, or you can be men and women of faith. And in verses 13 through 16, that's the picture that Moses paints. A picture of life with God as the center instead of self. Every one of us can live a radically different experience in this life if we keep God as the center of our lives instead of ourselves at the center of our lives. And so how do we put God at the center of our lives? First thing we must do is we cry out to God. Verse 13 says, relent, Lord, how long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. You can feel it in Moses' words here, his desire for God to intervene in his life. There's only one place to turn when we are faced with the brevity of life. It's not to self, but we need to return to God. We need to say, God, help us. This eternal God is a holy God. That was the whole reason that sin is so egregious to God, is because He is holy and He is eternal. And so our lives are short because of our sin, but we now need to return to God and say, God, help us. God is a compassionate God. God is a gracious God who loves us and longs for us to have eternal life. Truth is, none of us will be as eternal as God, but we can have life eternally from this point forward. If we receive God, if we turn to God. And so that's the next part. We need to receive God's gift. Look at verses 14 through 15. 14 says, satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love. There's that word again. We've talked about it a number of times in Psalms. It's chesed, right? It's God's loving kindness, His grace poured out to us because of who God is, out of His character. Not because we earn it, not because we deserve it, but by the nature of God who loves His people, whom He created. For God so loved the world that He sent His only Son, that all who believed in Him would have eternal life. It's His love poured out to us, out of His loving kindness. And He says, why? That we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. You want to live a life without cynicism? You want to live a life without hedonism? You sing with joy because God is the center of your life. And verse 15, make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. Now, if you give good attention to this, you'll see the role reversal. You'll see the complete change of circumstances here. Those phrases, many days and many years that he has here in verse 15. Back in verse 9, Moses, remember what he said? All our days pass away. Our years finish with a moan. But now he's saying, restore our years, restore our days. Give us hope again, God. Reminds me of the book of Joel. If you're familiar with the book of Joel, you'll know that was the prophet Joel who was writing to the nation. And he tells of the locust plague that had come, probably a literal locust plague that had come into the land and had destroyed the crops and had destroyed their livelihood. Everything was devastated. In fact, there were so many locusts, it says that the sun was darkened. I remember my grandfather telling a story of when apparently some locusts came through our farm north of Blair, and they had to bury the pitchforks so they wouldn't eat the wooden handles. And this is what would happen in the nation, is they would come in and it utterly destroyed the nation. And then the people repented of their sins. And their hearts were turned back to God. But in Joel chapter 2:25, it says this, I will repay you. This is the Lord speaking. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten. The great locust, the young locust, the other locust, the locust swarm, my great army that I sent among you. But here's the thing. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten. And how often I hold on to those words there, that God will repay us for the years the locusts have eaten. What are the locusts in your life? Probably not literal locusts. But has sexual immorality cost you years of pain and loss and heartache in your marriage or in your relationships? God can restore the years the locusts have eaten. Have addictions cost you relationships? God can restore the years the locusts have eaten. A few weeks ago, as I was heading out to lunch, over here down at the bottom of the ramp by the basement door, I came across a guy who was sleeping. 27 years old. He had his t-shirt on and it was covering his head and over his knees, and there was this one little sliver of shade there. It was one of those days when it was 118-degree heat index. And I was finally able to get his mom's phone number, and she came to pick him up. And her first thing was, he's been sober for a month. But I knew when I woke up this morning he was gone. He was back on meth. And we look at that and we think it's hopeless. There's no hope in this situation. But God can restore the years the locusts have eaten. God can save the addict. God can save those who have been caught in immorality. Other things which you've lost, days that you've lost because of things that you've done, God can restore those things to you. God restores the years the locusts have eaten. He gives you hope. He gives you promise. Those days that we saw trouble, God restores with hope and life. For most of us, that's not our issue. But maybe it's cynicism, and cynicism for all these years. God can restore the years the locusts have eaten. Hedonism, God can restore the years the locusts have eaten. And so our prayer, like that of Moses, is, Lord, make us glad, restore to us the joy of our salvation. That's the heart of what Moses is saying. And it's amazing news that God restores to us. Even as we count our days and we know what our end is, there is hope. God doesn't just restore us in proportion to the trouble we've experienced. He restores us according to His abundance. He restores us according to His righteousness. For those who call out to God, who repent of their sins, who receive Jesus Christ as Lord, He promises abundant life. I have come that you might have life and have it to the full, Jesus said. And when we know God's mercy, when we've tasted His grace, there's one more thing that Moses says in these verses. In verses 16 through 17, look at your Bibles. It says, may your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. In other words, God, I'm going to tell others. I'm going to tell my servants. I'm going to tell my children that you have restored me. In verse 17, may the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Establish the work of our hands. Life is short. God wipes things away. Life is ending quickly. That's the picture before, that nothing matters. Do you see the contrast? Lord, establish the work of our hands. That's a long-term thing. That's establishing a firmament. That's creating something that will last. Establish, Lord. So we have responsibility. We've talked about crying out to God and receiving God's gift, but we also have to pass it on. Tell those whom you work with, tell your children, God's favor has rested upon you. And look at verse 17, what's it say? Establish the work of our hands. It's the fruit of our confessional lives is that what we leave behind is faith for other generations yet to come. Two things that last forever. God's word and God's people. You want to establish the work of your hands, lead others to Jesus. You may be familiar with a poem by C.T. Studd. I wish I had that last name. But here's what it says. Two little lines I heard one day, traveling along life's busy way, bringing conviction to my heart and from my mind would not depart. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. A little later on in his poem, another stanza reads, only one life, yes, only one. Now let me say, thy will be done. And when at last I'll hear the call, I know I'll say, 'twas worth it all. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. I was reading this week in a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. It's a book that talks about what happens as we age. Not from a Christian perspective, but from a physician's perspective. And one of the things that happens as we age is our perspectives tend to change. I think many of us have experienced, in fact, one study that he talks about in there talks about happiness factors, and we put so much stake in our lives on achieving and accomplishing and becoming. And we assume that if we achieve the right thing, if we have the right thing, if we get what we want, and then we will have happiness. So much in our younger years is spent pursuing those things. But the happiness that is discovered in old age is not about achieving, having, or getting. It's not even about what was achieved or what was gotten. But instead it was about relationships. And in reality, as people got older, the number of relationships, rather than a vast number of them, they focused on just a few very significant ones. Rather than having all these accomplishments, they focused on the moment. Laura Carstensen, who did that study as she went into the field of gerontology, as she focused on those areas. But the reason she focused on it was because in 1974, she was 21 years old. At 21 years old, she had a newborn at home, and she was already had already filed for divorce with her husband. One night, after attending a concert, her and some friends piled into a little Volkswagen van, and as they were driving home, they got in a car accident. The driver was drunk, and she nearly lost her life. For months, she was in the hospital in recovery. But in light of that, there was a perspective change. When she was faced with her own mortality, her perspective changed. Instead of focusing on achieving and having and getting, she focused on what she had and who she knew and where she was. It wasn't about what she didn't have, but it was about what she had. And we can go through life complaining about what we don't have, or we can go through life thanking God for what we do have. And that's the perspective change that happens when we encounter our mortality. When we are confronted by the brevity of our lives, we have a choice to make. And whether you live to be 3 years old or whether you live to be 103 years old, it's shorter than what God created you for. You see, God created us to live with Him for eternity. And so we need to live these lives with our death in mind, but with eternity in mind. Have you come to the place in your spiritual life that you know for certain that if you were to die tonight, you would spend eternity with God in heaven? If you know that, then we're called to pass it on. We're called to invite others. We're called to establish the work of our hands that others might know Christ as well. So what will you choose? Will you choose a cynical life, a hedonistic life, or a Christ-centered life? Let's pray. Lord, we have but one life that will soon be past, and only what's done for Christ will last. I pray, Lord, that the things that we do here at Our Savior's Baptist Church would be things that would last for eternity. I pray, Lord, that in that we would not be the center of attention in our own lives, but Jesus would be the center of our attention. Rather than seeking our own selfish desires or seeking our own selfish affirmations or whatever it might be, Lord, that leads to cynicism and hedonism, may we instead put Jesus Christ on the throne of our life, and may He be the pursuit of our lives. I think of families recently in Gretna and other places who lost loved ones. I think of a shooting in El Paso in Gilroy, California. Lives were lost in a moment. And we may believe that we might live to be 103. But may we live with the reality that today may be our last, and may what we do be done for your glory in this moment. And may we live with an attitude of gratitude instead of this constant place of dissatisfaction. May we cherish the people around us. May we cherish the things we've given. May we cherish Christ. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.